I used to have a choice of speeds on camcorders, and I don't remember if I have a choice of speed on that. It's always been a 2-hour tape, so.
Okay, that's good. So that'd be the speed we want. Need a cup of coffee or some water or something?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, I know the one question that I had wanted to ask you was just to talk about the old house a little bit. And I remember I asked you over the phone to tell me about, just the process when you guys first moved in and what was going on with the family and stuff. Who'd you have and who didn't you have at that time, and where were you living when you first started? When you started wanting to move, what was that all about? How'd you find the house?
Okay, is it running now?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm okay. Can you hear me? I don't know whether you had your phones on. Hello, test. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, we moved into the house April 29th, 1963. And had a moving van where we lived on Reynolds Park Road. Carry all our stuff out. And of course, we had closed on the house April the 18th. But the house wasn't finished. It was being built by a guy who lived 2 doors down who was a building contractor. And he was building it for himself if he could sell his house. So we looked at his house, and Mona was pregnant with Heather at that time. So there were going to be 5, and we figured that this house that Paul Lynch was building, Paul Flint was building, would be better suited to us. So we shook hands on a deal right there. 39.5. And to compare that with houses, the house we were moving at was a middle scale house and was 17 and a half.
You really moved up.
So that's how prices of things were going then. But the house wasn't finished when we moved in. And the reason we had to move in was there's always a chain of events that are happening. Like when we agreed to sell our house, we have to move out in order to move in a new place. Yeah. And of course the real estate agent that knew this house now that we were in on Reynolds Park Road was available, sold it to another guy, and said, well, approximate move-in date was what we were told. And on top of that, that guy's house was sold to a third person. And the chain, in order for this thing to start moving, we had to move. And we closed on the 18th of April, but we couldn't move. On the 29th, I decided, I've had it. We're moving. We had the van, we moved out, moved in, the contractors, what's going on? They're still there. Electricians are working, plumber. The electrician actually had the most work to do, and that was finished work. And we just moved in. We didn't have enough furniture to fill up a living room, so for a couple of years the living room was empty. It had carpet, it had wallpaper that came with the house. But that huge room was taking family pictures in there, and it was like an empty auditorium. No furniture, no seats, but people, lots of people lined up against the wall.
What's with the, like all the little stairs, like the 2 steps up to the dining room and then 3 steps down to the hallway there? Is it?
Well, I wasn't involved in the design of the house. Paul was designing it for himself and his family, and I don't really have any idea what those steps were, but that was probably a design he had gotten a hold of that an architect had invented, dreamed up, and it had a nice effect. Step up to the dining room, step down from the dining room to living room, and from the hallway to the living room. Thought it was a nice effect. He did say that the downstairs bedroom and bath, well, downstairs bedroom was what he called a maid's room, where a live-in maid would stay.
I didn't know that.
So when we had house guests, we don't have a maid visiting us. They could have their own bath and their own floor,
Yeah.
and a lot of privacy went with that. Of course, we rarely had visitors. On those occasions, it might be a factory person visiting with me who appreciated spending the night with the rep in his home as opposed to a motel in town somewhere. So there was Munner and me, Margie, your mama, Bob, Jenny, Cindy, and we moved in April 27th, and on July 14th, Heather was born. Not in the house. She was born in those days. It was Baptist Hospital. Had places where you could, I don't know, birthing centers.
Right.
I forget what they call those things. But Cindy had been born here in Winston, and it was at what they called City Hospital in those days, which I think is a retirement home now, over in East Winston.
And where was Jenny born?
Jenny was born in Arlington, Virginia, when we lived on Barley Walk in Falls Church. The nearest hospital was the Arlington County Hospital, up towards D.C. Falls Church is out in Fairfax County. We're about 10 miles out of D.C., about 5 miles from the hospital.
What about Bob?
Bob was born in Columbia, South Carolina, while I was a student at the University of South Carolina.
What do you remember about that?
Well, after getting out of the Navy, trying to get back to finish my college education, which Munner had already graduated in '48. I went back in the Navy in 1949 and had the Korean War. And started back to school in '53, which was the earliest opportunity I could have as a senior in electrical engineering because of all the prerequisite courses, some of them not taught in like the summer session. Taking advance, I had to wait till a fall session or a spring session. But I needed 150 semester hours. And I did a summer school for all the electives and other stuff that was available. And finished in May of '54. Started in '44. Finished in '54. Took me 10 years to do the 5-year engineering course, with 2 wars in between.
So let's see. My mom was born in Rhode Island.
She was born at the Naval Air Station, Ponset Point, Rhode Island.
But and your last two were born in Winston-Salem, Cindy and Heather.
Cindy and Heather were both born here, right?
What did, back to the house, that, the master bedroom must have sold it. That's huge.
Well, that was huge, and I appreciated that because at that time, I would have an office in my house, even though the company I worked for at that time had an office in town. I had had an office before that with that company. They decided to open an office in town when we're going to have extra personnel. Matter of fact, that was part of the conversation between the late Sidney Lee, for whom I went to work, and came to Winston-Salem. I worked out of my home. And then we decided we needed to expand some years later and go out and hire somebody. And we did that, and I commented with Sid. I said, I can't have it. I'm out on the road for a week and have Bill Peake, our first guy, come to work in my offices in my bedroom in my home while I'm out of town. So we got an office in town, and started out that way. And when we moved, I still had a sense of an office, which I kept, and that room was big enough to have the office in. On account of you guys, all the kids, used up all the other rooms. When we first moved to Winston in '56, there were just three, and then Cindy coming. I could have the whole dining room for my office. Now out at this house in Brookcliff, all the rooms were filled with people.
Yeah.
So one corner of the master bedroom was the office for several years. Then when the room Heather grew up in, which is the one you grew up in, when Heather grew up and out, and you came in and moved out, I was able to have that as my office, which is what it was when we moved out of there.
What about that, the clubhouse down the street? Was that there when you moved in?
The clubhouse was there, and the club, part of the clubhouse, was there. It was like the recreational club of Brookcliff. And for some reason, one of our members who lived up behind us on Sweetbriar, the Nelsons, Bill Nelson was a lawyer, and I guess he knew what the rules were for taxes and responsibilities, and decided that we would incorporate the club, so we all became shareholders. But somehow it wasn't handled exactly properly, and shares of stock we bought in it did not appreciate. The membership just stayed flat, it seemed, for all the time we were out there, and then started downhill. Mostly people used that club when we were there for their kids to swim in the pool. Well, in wintertime, you had to have parties, and pretty heavily some of those dinner parties were, please, no children. And people imbibed quite a bit. And we didn't have any fights or anything like that, but people became extremely happy. And I remember being drunk in the pool, and a couple other people were in the pool drunk, and I think I was trying to say I better watch them so they don't drown. And I wasn't a whole lot better at the time. But that, when you grew up and out, we didn't have any more reason to pay our dues, to have to pay dues, because Mona didn't really enjoy those kind of parties. She liked the people who, in ordinary life, were very nice people. When they got down there, they let their hats down. And it got kind of silly in places. So the club is, I don't have no idea what it is now. We've been out of it. In '92, a hurricane came through and flooded the club. I don't know, I think the water line was halfway up the wall. And I took some pictures of that. It's when your mama had that '92 Datsun, 72, 1970 Datsun, that orange with the black top. I think '72 is the year, that was that model year I bought it. Because, you know, as kids grew up, I needed more cars. I was talking about going up to 2 cars back in '56 when school started. I needed my car to drive, and Mona needed something to drive, so we became a 2-car family. Out at the house at Brookcliff, we became a parking lot. Looked like a used car dealership. I had my Toronados.
And did you have one that you drove and Mona had one that she drove, or did y'all share?
She drove the '65. No, she didn't. She drove the newer one. When I didn't have to use it to tow the Airstream. But she drove the '71, the '73, and I was driving the '65 model.
Is that the white one?
Mm-hmm.
And then
I think the first car I bought for kids was your mama's, and that was a Volkswagen, about a '49 model.
really?
The back window was elliptical. Now I say 49, that may be 59, but it was, I think it was 49, because I only paid $500 for it. And it caused your mom a lot of trouble with it. Then I got her a Pontiac from a place that a friend of hers worked. It's one of those old Pontiacs. It was nothing but trouble. I even went down and tried to get my money back. I believe the guy may have, I don't remember whether I traded it in or not, how I did that. But her next car was the Datsun.
I remember that.
That was our 3-car. Then Bob's was the SS 396, 79,
Sounds fast.
69. Chevrolet. I forgot what they call it. Just a Chevrolet SS 390s, which is the size of the engine.
Yeah.
And of course, he modified it. That Volkswagen that I think it's the Volkswagen we may have bought for your mama. I'm not certain, but we had another green Volkswagen that Bob had a problem with and rolled. And we were out of town. He wasn't supposed to be driving at all. I mean, he was not old enough to didn't have a license. But he had a girlfriend up in Lake Hills. She was in it. And anyway, we came home and parked our car on our side of the garage and walking past the Volkswagen, which is where the Toronado usually sits. I said it. All crumply, and of course everybody in the neighborhood knew about it. And came back and said, "Hey, how's Bob? How's your car doing? What?" But he rebuilt that car. I think that's the one he rebuilt, and it became I used to call it a 66, 67, 69 model Volkswagen, because it had pieces and parts from all those.
All three.
And it ran fine.
never saw that coming. The first one must have been the most dramatic, you know?
We had problems with that whole driveway all the time. Yeah.
Hi. I'm pretty good. Watch out. I probably
Where's
speak.
Brett? Oh, is it?
That didn't happen.
Planet you on.
Yeah. Well, all right, Grandad, we didn't ask.
Well, I used to be from what was a planet, but it's not a planet anymore.
I'm just gonna be random about this, but tell me about your first pet. I have no idea what your first pet was.
Funny thing about that, but I never had a pet as my pet, per se. In the city, people had animals, I guess, but in my family, we didn't have animals, as a rule. And when we lived in Grandpa's house, he never had animals that I recall. Do you recall?
I wasn't there, but.
Well, I mean, anytime. There never were animals. There were animals that got into our backyard, and which all our yards adjoined, no fences between them, and some had fences, some didn't. So there's no telling where the animal came from. And I have some memories of a dog, but they're so
Oh, she's fine.
I don't remember any details of it. So that was the nature. And growing up in the city, you didn't need it. You really didn't need an animal for a pet.
I got it. Talk to me about where you lived, the exact address, if you remember, and the neighborhood that you grew up in New York.
Well, starting from 0 to age 10, it was 1224 Union Avenue, New York, the Bronx, New York. And it was a regular city neighborhood. Our house was a townhouse. There were either 5 or 6 connected houses, 3-story houses with a basement, so 4 levels. And in our house, what we call Grandpa's house, each floor was a complete living unit. Kitchen, bath, bedrooms, dining room. And at first we lived on the top floor, and some strangers not in the family lived on the bottom floor. Grandpa lived in the middle. And the downstairs people moved out. I don't remember how old I was at the time, but long before I was 10, and we moved downstairs. And downstairs had a back porch, enclosed, and what else? Had a backyard, basement, had furnace, coal-fired, and it had a little mini furnace alongside it, coal-fired for hot water. And I had one of my chores was to shovel coal into the big furnace in winter, and the little furnace, winter and summer. It's all big. It was big city back then in the late 20s, early 30s. The milkman delivered milk in a horse-drawn wagon, which was not a country wagon. It was a wagon that was manufactured by a wagon manufacturer. It was called Sheffield Farms, was the dairy. And it was a classic, almost British royalty appearing. Being pulled by a good-looking horse. The horse was even dressed. Had a, what do you call it? You put it across. under a saddle.
They're asking about horse people. A blanket?
What's the thing that,
He would
like
wear-
policemen, police horses have with the show, like NYPD
Oh, a saddle blanket?
saddle blanket that goes under the saddle
Yeah.
on the horse.
Yeah.
Okay, it was a saddle blanket. It would say Sheffield Farms on it.
Oh.
And they delivered milk in glass bottles with cream at the top of the bottle because homogenized had not been invented yet.
Grandad, do you mind taking your glasses off? Is that all right?
Yeah, fine.
Okay, great. Good.
Do I still look like me without my
You
glasses?
do, you do. What about, tell me about great-grandma's family and how they ended up coming over from Germany.
Oh, Lord. Well, your great-grandma was the 8th of 10 children, all by one father, my grandpa, and one grandmother who passed away after the 10 kids were born. And Grandpa went back to Germany to get another wife, because that's where the whole family was from, was Germany. And the northern part of Germany, not the southern, and the eastern part of Germany, not the western part. So it was in that land that come World War I and World War II would be all bent out of shape. Like at the time they came over, the thing there was called the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Had an emperor.
Wasn't even called Germany?
No.
Oh.
A province may have been called Germany, but the other, back in the early, I don't know about those days, but I think part of it still existed. With it was the Ottoman Empire, which was Turkish. And there's a lot of history into that, and all of that blended into that part of our family, my grandfather's side of the family. But anyway, he was ordained a priest in the Catholic Apostolic Church and sent over here to be part of the church in Manhattan, New York. And if you hear that Catholic Apostolic name, there were several of those groups formed as an offshoot church by other denominations. And I guess there's a famous building in New York on 57th Street, which some people say is the original, the first Catholic Apostolic Church. And my grandfather's church was on 114th Street, just off 7th Avenue, which is 7 blocks north of the north end of Central Park. Anyway, that was his job. And he did get a second wife to come back and be mother to the kids. Then she died. And I'm not sure whether he went back to Germany or not, but he wound up marrying again, and my grandmother, Helen, was his third wife, and she had a son, George, and their last name was Gleich. Helene Gleich and George Gleich. And George was grown up, and he was the sort of chauffeur for my grandfather, who had the cars. The first car I remember going either to church and or to his summer home in New Jersey was a Model A Ford 1930. It's the first car I remember. Then the next one was a 1937 Dodge. But George was the driver for that.
Where was great-grandma born?
Your great grandma was born in New York City, in the Bronx. I guess the same hospital I was, called Fisher Sanitarium, as I can recall the name of it, on West Tremont Avenue in the Bronx.
She pretty much lived up until she moved to Florida. When she was very, elderly, she lived her whole life in New York.
Oh yeah, she retired from the CBS radio division in 1968, and they kept calling her back to work because they were converting from manual accounting to punch card. I think that's the expression she used. They're going to punch cards, and I think she used the word IBM. So that was the beginning of the computerizing of accounts, in her case, accounts receivable. And the funny thing about one of her jobs, when she became, in the job many years, she was a supervisor. And one of her titles was as accounts receivable supervisor for all radio stations in the United States whose letter started with W, which meant she had the eastern part of the United States. And when Munner went to work for a radio station in Columbia, before I could finish telling her, she said, "Oh, WKIX." She knew them, and other radio stations we'd come to name. Every now and then, she'd shrivel up her face. She said, "Oh, that one, they don't pay their bills." And I'm talking, 60 years ago. So they had those kind of problems back in those days.
Where did she go work, the CBS place?
Well, the address for CBS Radio was 485 Madison Avenue. And that was the home base for all of CBS. And she had a choice. I don't remember, it was after the war, but she was a little puzzled, and she even asked me what she should do. She says, "They're splitting the company into 2 divisions." I said, "What's that?" She said, "CBS Radio." Well, it was always Columbia Broadcasting System, but everybody used CBS, so that became its name. But they were splitting it into CBS Radio and CBS TV. And she thought about it and decided she's going to stay with radio. So we visited her. I think Munner was with us one time. We visited her. And I can't remember the name of the restaurant. Colby's was a big name restaurant in the bottom of 485 Madison Avenue, and all the radio anchors would eat in there, so Mama would meet all these famous people, and Arthur Godfrey's the one that she saw the most, I guess. I learned somewhat later that he was a Navy pilot.
All right, we're on, yeah. All right.
Would changing the angle of those blinds over there help?
I think they're far enough away that they're really not doing anything.
Well, you're getting direct light rather than diffused. You might get some on the ceiling to angle down. It's over on the left. You wanted this down a little, I think.
Yeah, so about 75. Okay, yeah. Okay, great. Let's see, where were we? Let's go to talk about.
Well, we were back in my
You're talking about grandma.
grandma
Yeah.
and her work.
Tell me about when you went off to Carolina and we'll story about how you met Mona.
Oh, that's not a long story, but yes, long. I was sent to the University of South Carolina by the Navy after World War II was over. I was sent first to the University of Miami, and they only had one semester left and decommissioned it.
It's all right.
They decommissioned that unit. Oh, you stopped it. Okay.
You're all right. Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, you're recording all that?
Yeah, we got tape. Just let it roll.
Oh, okay. They decommissioned the University of Miami after a semester. They sent us to South Carolina. And I finished. I got enough points to get out of the Navy, and most of us in there were anxious to get out of the Navy rather than to stay in, even though we had a pretty good program we were going to be entering into. So I left and became a civilian, but go back to college as a civilian.
Sorry.
Back to college as a civilian. I went back in September '46, and I met Munner in 1948 when she was a society editor of the Gamecock, which was the university newspaper. It was published once a week. And all the other fraternities in the school had their spring dances, big functions. Sigma Chi had their big dance, and AKA had their big dance. The sororities and fraternities both did. But those of us who were not in fraternities were members of engineering societies. So I got into 4 chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, civil engineers, and electrical engineers to form a combined technical engineers joint council. That's what we called it. And I was the chairman of it and had to arrange publicity. My idea was just, how do we get publicity? Well, good. We'll make you the chairman and you're in charge.
So you're interested in getting them all together like that?
Yeah, and having the pictures in the paper who the sponsors are.
Mm-hmm.
So
what compelled you to want to do that?
just be competitive. The engineers were sort of a orphan end of the university. Like, largely we occupied buildings that were occupied by other departments. It's like, we got space for you guys, you can have a class here. And our main building was off campus, off the main quad. Anyway, I just thought we'd get a little more publicity, get a little better understanding of how things were going. And in the process of getting pictures of the girls who would be the sponsors for the chairman of the separate organizations, we went to the Gamecock office, a buddy of mine, working together on this, went to the Gamecock office with all the information, and Munner was the society editor, so she did the taking the notes and getting the pictures. And after we left the office and got back to our
Is
dormitories,
that when you met her, by going to the office that time?
that's the first time I ever saw her. We, my phone rang on my floor in Preston dormitory, and it was Munner, and she said, "I've got these pictures, 4 pictures, and they're sponsoring 4 people, the presidents of the societies, and I don't know who's who." And she said, "The paper goes to bed this afternoon at 2 o'clock," and this was like 11 o'clock, or maybe right close to lunchtime.
Let me interrupt real quick. How did, like, the phone system back then, I mean, did y'all have a shared phone for your whole floor, the dorm, or
We had Preston dormitory had 3 or 4 floors, I forget which, but there was a phone at each end of each floor. And when the phone rang, somebody close to it would answer it. Somebody said who they're looking for, and you know, just shout loudly, so and so's phone. And I happened to be walking by the phone that particular morning, late morning, as I recall, and it rang. So I picked it up, and it was somebody looking for Bob Lee. And she named the other name, and I said, "Well, I'm Bob Lee." So she said, I'm Corky Corley, that was her name. And explained the question. So I said, "Well, I'm not doing anything. I'll head right over." So I walked over to the office, and the funny part of that, of the 2 of us, she thought I might be the other guy to show
because
up.
she had pictures of each one of you?
I wasn't one of the pictures, nor was the other guy. We were in the Engineers Joint Council
Right.
and sponsoring with the American Society of Civil Engineers, American Institute of Electrical Engineers, American Society of Chemical Engineers, and then Civil Engineers. They were all, had their names, but the presidents. And, I was able to match up the pictures with them. And then she said, "Well, I'm walking up to the print shop because I have to have it in by 2 o'clock." And I walked with her. And it was a pretty good walk, probably a couple of miles through downtown city streets. So I had a chance to just chat, talk, go up, put the paper to bed, give all the information the paper needed. And then I don't remember whether we went anywhere to eat. It's fuzzy for me. But that's how we met initially. It's not that we dated or had any kind of heavy dating or anything like that. At one point, I had a date with a high school senior who from a church that I had been going to, and she had taken a liking to me. For going to the first annual engineers ball that we were trying to promote. And when I started seeing more of Munner, that was going to be a sort of well, how do I handle this? And what Munner said is, "You go to that dance with that girl." I said, "Well, my suit needs pressing." She said, "I'll take your suit and take it up to the room and press it for you." The girls thought she was nuts. Said, "Why are you pressing the suit of a guy who's taking somebody else to a dance?" That's her nature, still is. So, we just, I guess, began seeing each other more often. We went to the beach, which was...
You had a car then?
No. No, this was May of 48, and I would not get my first car until April of 1950.
How'd you get to the
Part of it we rode with friends who were going in that direction, and dropped us off. And other friends who were going further in that direction, we rode with them. At one point, we rode a bus. I don't remember if that was over or back, but we stayed at what was then the Hotel Douglas MacArthur at Ocean Drive, and this was a beach party kind of thing that the girls from Coker College got together every summer for, and this was one of those, and Miss Corky would be bringing this new guy. And we have lots of pictures in our albums of that first get together. TV interview would be nice if you could put some of those pictures in,
Yeah, yeah.
which are, again, those are in an album. Those are the first pictures of Munner and me.
Mm-hmm. It says Ocean Drive.
This was at the original Ocean Drive.
It's before Garden City got built up, huh?
Well, Garden City was the foreign land because it was south of Myrtle Beach, and Ocean Drive itself was, what, a good 10, 15 miles north of Myrtle Beach into what is now North Myrtle Beach.
Yeah.
But you had, in those early days, Myrtle Beach, Windy Hill Beach, Atlantic Beach, Crescent Beach, Ocean Drive, and Cherry Grove. I may have missed a couple. Tillman was a beach. Ocean Drive, Tillman Beach, and Cherry Grove. And our Ocean Drive thing, where we had our first house in '68, was in the Tillman Beach part of Ocean Drive. The Sand something place that Munner and all the girlfriends that she was at Coker College with. But we met that in '48 for that occasion, sometime in May, late May of '48, before I went home. And I think I took Munner home with me that summer too, during the summer
To New York.
part to New York, yeah, in '48.
Did y'all take a train?
I think we rode the train. My mind gets fuzzy. We need a little help from Munner on that part.
Tell me about when you first met any of Munner's family. Who'd you meet?
Well, that would have been that summer,
Mm-hmm.
and we went down to Edgefield, and I met her father, and Margaret and Wilbur and Bill had been at the University of Georgia. He's out of service. And I'm living in a little town, I can't remember the name of it now, like Watkinsville, and living in Athens for a period of time. And Munner and I went to Athens and stayed with Wilbur, Margaret, and Bill. And in '48, Bill would have been 4 years old. I'll give you some age matchups for that period of time.
Yeah.
And Aunt Margaret was 6 years older than Munner. And Wilbur was a little older than that, 6 years, maybe 8 or 10 years older than Munner. And I guess we drove with them back to Edgefield. And I met the father, and Jimmy was in there coming around from somewhere. And I don't know where Joe was. I didn't meet him then. He'd gone back in the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
I first met him in a class I had at the university in applied mechanics, which all engineering disciplines had to take that course.
Is that after you met Munner, though?
That's before I met Munner.
You met Joe before?
I met Joe and knew of him, but not him. He was a bomber pilot in the Air Corps, and all during World War II. And another buddy of mine there was a P-51 Mustang fighter pilot. And every time we'd hear a plane go over, look out the window, the professor would make noise about we're not paying attention. Well, we weren't paying attention. We were getting kind of homesick for doing that. I was going to the Naval Air Station at DeKalb Peachtree Airport, is what it's known as now, and flying. But I had to hitchhike over and hitchhike back, and that wasn't too much of a problem, but it was just, you never knew what to expect the next time. It was 232 miles. So I said, to hell with that, and I joined the South Carolina Air National Guard.
What about the first time you met Uncle Jimmy? You may have mentioned that.
I don't recall the exact first time, but I came down Christmas of '48. I came down from, I was up in New York at home, and I came down to, I wanted to, see Munner and see her family and actually spend Christmas with them. So I did that, and that was probably the first time I met Jimmy. And again, I don't think Joe was there. I don't recall Joe being there. But having gone back into service, he was probably doing something, whatever it was they were doing. In those years, he was transitioning to B-29s.
Well, tell me about your relationship with Uncle Sam when you first enlisted, and like what happened when you finally got out.
Well, that was first went in when I turned 17. I graduated from high school in January of '43, and a couple of my buddies lied about their age to go in the Marine Corps. I went with them, but I didn't lie too well. So they took them. They were the right age. And they kind of told me to go home, grow up. And they were both killed at Iwo in '45. I was in the service by then. I went in and, I turned 17 on April 27th of '44. So I went down to enlist. I took some Naval Academy exams. It was a process of doing that kind of thing. But I didn't want to go to school. I wanted to go to war. So they had a special program for enlisted people to go into called Combat Aircrew. And this would steer clear of going to all the boot camps that regular Navy people went to, as they probably still do these days, like Great Lakes. Sampson, New York was one. I think they had one near Bainbridge, Maryland. But these were all pretty much what I want to call in black shoe type boots. And instead, they gave me my orders and had promoted me from apprentice seaman to seaman second class on the spot, with the designator behind my name called CA, as Combat Aircrew, and sent us to Naval Air Station in Jacksonville for boot camp. There weren't a whole lot of us. There were probably 100 of us
I think
in
you
that
lost me
group.
for a minute. They tell you, your buddies tried to early on. They signed up for the Marines, and you were too young. And that was right after you graduated, and 43,
Yeah,
and then you had to wait the X amount of time before you could go talk to the Navy.
right before I could talk to anybody. And by that time, I'd been talking with the Navy on the Naval Academy exams. I was, out of curiosity, I was just asking about that. And while I was down there doing that, somehow they would. I probably didn't impress them all that much about going through with the program. I took some exams and passed them, took physical and passed them. When I got to the psychological part, they said, we think what you ought to do is wait until you're a little older. I guess the way I was talking is I didn't want to go to college. So why try to convince somebody to go if he doesn't want to go? I would think I would be I wouldn't pay attention. And, my uncle had graduated from the academy in 1917. But anyway, the Navy and flying with the Navy was what was impressing me in that particular time in 44. Later on, I hoped that I would have some opportunity to fly with Marines. But they weren't interested in multi-engine pilots, which is what I had become.
So,
And I had become that on account of I was married when I shouldn't have been.
well, that was, like, back then, what did you do, sign up for 4 years, or is that how it went?
Well, you sign up for a program, and the program has a series of things you go through, like at the time things change over a period of time. We talk about the combat aircrew program. I went through it and did what I was supposed to do, and then by the time it was over, short was after over, and I hit the fleet, the war was over. So who wants to hang around? I mean, they were cutting the budget like crazy after World War II was over.
So where were you when you heard, like, all the big news for VE Day? About that one, you remember where you were?
VE Day, I was at Naval Air Station in Jacksonville, flying out of NAS Jax. Actually, Cecil Field is where I was, an auxiliary air station just west of Naval Air Station at Jax, where today they call it an attack community, lived. And I was in a crewman in a dive bomber.
Did y'all see that coming? Was that a surprise, or?
No, it's part of what I put in all my aviation radio training at Memphis, my gunnery school at Purcell, Oklahoma, and whether I wanted Atlantic Fleet or Pacific Fleet for activity. They gave us a choice. And New York was still home. So that's where I went, is to the Atlantic Fleet, and they assigned me to a scout bombing squadron at Cecil Field to practice. The group I wound up with was anti-submarine warfare.
Well, like, when you heard the news about VJ Day, was that surprise? I mean, VE Day, I'm sorry.
Well, at the time VE Day came and nothing was happening, at least where I was. They weren't transferring me, my group, anywhere. The opportunity came. An admiral named Holloway started a Naval Aviation Preparatory Program, an APP. And this was 2 years of college as a midshipman in the system, and that's what I got into. I sat down as a midshipman. Uh, some of that changed, and I forget where the changes were made. We went in as apprentice seamen into the V5 program. And that was at the University of Miami, and VJ Day came while I was there.
Was that a surprise? Nobody knew we had the bond, did they?
Well, since I worked on this stupid thing when I was 15 years old, you might think, well, gee, Lee, why didn't you know about it? I said, because I didn't have the slightest damn idea what I was doing in that working for Manhattan Project. It didn't, at the age of 15, names like that don't mean anything to you.
But they weren't exactly telling you what was going on either, I'm sure.
Well, no, right, not at all, but there were always references to Enrico Fermi and splitting atoms on a ball field in Chicago. And but connecting it up to what I was doing, where I was working at Columbia University. No connection whatsoever, and certainly not with a weapon. A reactor, nuclear reactor, that's always had that kind of research going on for many, many years, and overseas before it even happened here.
Yeah. So you were in Miami when that happened?
I was at the University of Miami in a V5 unit.
Betty wasn't living down there then, was she?
No, she wasn't living there. It wasn't until I think it was late 46. No, correction. No, she was not down there. It was 1956, I think, when we learned that she had married and was living in Miami. And that was a surprise to our mother. So Betty was kind of independent of telling people anything about what was going on. And some of that,
Well, what took her to Miami? Was Mark's family down there?
none of us have this. I don't have the slightest idea.
Sunshine?
Mona may have, better memory than I, and talking with Betty and or Mark and or Mama, doing girl talk, might be able to contribute to that, but I doubt it.
So anyway, so you're down there in Miami and you heard about VJ Day and you've got to figure, well, this is going to change things for me a little bit.
Yeah, I started looking how many points I had to be able to get out.
Uh-huh.
I needed 200 points, and I didn't quite have that. So I stayed at South Carolina, but I wasn't paying attention. So my grades just went down the tubes. But the faculty insisted on keeping me at mid-semester, even though I was flunking. And at the end of the semester, I was flunking even worse. And I sort of, I just wasn't interested in it anymore. And I wound up I got promoted from apprentice seaman to seaman first class, which was the highest enlisted rating I was allowed to have because of the nature of the war requirements. People in my class at Memphis, less than a year before, were graduating as warrant officers. Then that got reduced to chief petty officer, then first class, then second class, then third class. By the time my class started, 22 weeks later, seaman first class is all we would make. That was kind of disappointing because you figure you're doing something to go up in the world and you're coming down in it. That was one of many disappointments that I had. So, talking about disappointments, one of them was this confusing thing. Well, I'll lead up to that as part of this. I left, they promoted me to seaman first class. All the other people that left, and there were 13 or 14 or 15 of us were a group. And somebody had to be put in charge of that. And one of the guys was an NROTC midshipman.
Keep talking, I gotta get my water.
Was an NROTC midshipman who thought he'd be put in command of that group. And he was actually reduced to apprentice seaman. And I had the highest rank rating. So they put me in charge, and I took that crowd to Great Lakes. Still making up points. And by April, let's see, I was at Quonset Point, in I guess what they call ship's company, the radio station. And the nature of that radio station was it was the First Naval District, Navy's First Naval District radio facility. And I was in there just doing operating, helping operate the station. And that was round the world type communications related to all the bases in First Naval District. And then my 200 points came up in April of 46. I was sent to Lido Beach, New York, for separation. Mom, home! Age 19.
Then what?
Well, I worked for Willie Levine doing painting outside fire escapes in New York City. And, vacation, I'd work with him, make some money, spend it.
What'd you do in your spare time when you were back there, 19 in New York?
Well, didn't seem like I had that much spare time. I worked on fire, as I say, I worked on fire escapes and burned out buildings that were being redone. That was another project that Willie had. And Willie and my mother had become friends, so it was a family kind of a thing. He kept his eye on me. I had work to do. I got paid. I was scab. It was a union shop, tight union shop. But I didn't become a union member. And Willie heard about that many times. Like if I handled the rope on a scaffolding, the shop stewards would say, "Get your hand off that rope. You ain't union. You're a scab." The human bodies are up there on it, and this guy is rattling off to me. I think it was had Italian accent. Some were Polish. They're all nationalities in the city at that time. Like refugees practically, but they're working, but they're union. And at one particular point, I did let go of that line, and the scaffold started to fall. I grabbed it, and the shop steward like had a heart attack. My boss got a hold of him, like to beat him to death too. And the guys up there had heart attacks. But I mean, when he had yelled at me, I was frightened, and I let go. It just slipped in my hand.
What were they paying you back
And
then?
$1 an hour.
Uh-huh.
He was generous to me in those days. When I quit working before I went in the Navy at age, I was 17 then. I guess at SAM Labs, I was making something like 50 cents an hour.
So this was a pretty good job. Making $1 an hour would be pretty good.
Oh, yeah. And it was probably, I don't know what the union wage would have been. It might have been higher than, I think it might have been higher than the union guy was getting, even in those days. But anyway, I I don't remember going to, in summertime, going to the beach with the guys, Orchard Beach, Jones Beach, and some family, visiting uncles, cousins. Just a general mix of that. No particular thing. Maybe going downtown for a show. To New York again, nothing fancy. New York natives aren't that much into what you read about in New York in magazines. It's like I have yet to go to the Statue of Liberty. I'm a New York native. I've sailed past the island a number of times, but never laid foot on the island.
I see.
And it wasn't until Munner was with me, I guess that was in '48, that we went up on the Empire State Building.
Was that Munner's first time in New York?
Yeah, oh yeah. And again, here I live here. The Empire State Building has been there after I was born, but never had even thought about going up in it like a tourist would, visiting New York. My mother never was that much interested in it. My father certainly wasn't. Of course, he left home when I was 13. So that changed lifestyle a little bit anyway.
So you're back in New York after the Navy, and you're working for this paint shop. How long did that last?
Until I went back to school in September.
Columbia?
Went back to South Carolina, right. Not to Columbia. I went to Columbia, started at Columbia University after I graduated from high school.
Yeah.
But now I went back to Columbia. I'm at Columbia, South Carolina.
Columbia, South Carolina.
Well, it's a little difficult having points, credits, what do you call them?
Oh, yeah. Academic credits? or whatever?
Academic credits from, here I have, I don't think I really had any from Columbia. I didn't finish anything. But from University of Miami and the University of South Carolina. Why try to go to another school and have to get all those records?
Mm-hmm. That's still a pain today.
Yeah.
So
It's probably even worse today.
probably so.
But I wanted to go back to South Carolina. At that time, no particular reason. It was convenient. And, you know, my academic record there as a Navy person wasn't all that swift, but they said they'd be happy to have me back as a civilian.
So at some point you ended up back in the Navy, though.
Well, some other
You
things,
want something to drink?
other things happened before them. No, that's okay.
Right. I got to keep drinking water.
I'll nuke the coffee later.
Well, you met Munner, you guys got married, but when you got married, weren't you already in the Navy again? Yeah.
I guess we have to throw in some other things that are going to be related to all that.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of keep it simple. How do you keep it simple? Okay, I went back to school in '46. Met Munner. Well, before I met Munner even, I was hitchhiking to Atlanta Naval Air Station, and that was a pain in the butt. So I switched out of the Navy into the South Carolina Air Guard. It was the 157th Single Engine Fighter Squadron, Mustangs, and I would be in the utility flight, which had Douglas A-26 Invader aircraft as the utility flight, towing targets. And it was at the Congaree Marine Corps Auxiliary Air Station. That's where the Guard was. And the Marines had decommissioned out of it. So it just became SCANG, SCANG Air Base. Later to become a U.S. Air Force base, and I don't know how they designate it, but it's Barney McIntyre Field. And he was our commanding officer when he was alive. And he was killed in a plane crash, so they wound up naming the field after him. So it's Barney McIntyre Air Base. And I guess it's just South Carolina Air National Guard. The last time I was in there, whatever they call the aircraft on duty, where the guy's in the bird in the cockpit, like 90 seconds, and he's off the ground in another 30 seconds, were F-4B Phantom jets. I think F-16s have probably replaced them, and maybe they got F-15s. All those are old airplanes anyway, anymore these days. I don't know what's new. But that was the latest thing, and there was a guy there at the base that I remembered when I stopped in to visit, just, I don't know, 10 years ago. And my particular commanding officer was sick at home. I couldn't go visit him. Anyway, I joined that, and the next thing that happened was the Marine Corps visited the university looking for candidates for its platoon leaders class. What you running out of time?
No, I'm fine. I'm just looking at it. Okay, I'm listening.
Opening up with looking for candidates for their platoon leaders class. And I had always had in the back of my mind a relationship with the Marines. And my buddies were memories of part of all of that. And so I got out of the South Carolina National Guard and into the Marine Corps. And went to, this is in 47, summer 47, summer 48, went to Quantico for 6 weeks for the basic school training program for people like us. And when you got your degree, you got your commission as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. So that's where I am now. And I'm meeting Munner in this period of time. So the military part is just, that's a summer thing. Don't think about it the rest of the time. And Uncle Jimmy was visiting with us one October 1948, October. And we went to the stadium. I don't remember who was playing. But the three of us sat up in the stands and watched the ball game.